Hello, and welcome back to Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game between Wenjun and Carissa Yip from this year's Cairns Cup. This was actually kind of the story of the tournament. Carissa Yip actually managed to take down the women's world champion in this game and kind of ruined her chances of getting first place in the tournament. Why don't we take a look and see how she did it? Of course, the game started with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now after bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, we have the Ruy Lopez, and here Carissa actually chose to do a pretty interesting line that is kind of growing in popularity lately. And it's this move, g6, that she chose to play. This has definitely been seen before, but really it's on the rise currently, so if it's new to you, be sure to check it out with both sides, both colors here. It's important to know. The idea being, white is usually trying to play this move d4, and so black is just going to put this bishop on this long open diagonal and try to make use of the bishop in that sense. Players such as Shakhmat and Yarov have actually been playing this recently, but let's continue. So d4 is played immediately in this case. This isn't the main move. Usually white tries this move c3 or gets castled before opening it up quite so early, but d4 is fine. We see e takes d4. Now white actually does continue with c3, offering up the pawn. In this case, though, black declines it, simply developing the bishop to g7 instead. Now, white regains her pawn, and black expands on the queen side with the move b5. After bishop b3, we see black develop with knight g e7. Of course, you don't really want to play knight f6, block in this bishop. You'd also be walking into this move e5. So the e7 square it is for this knight. Now, white tries to make use of black not taking any claim in the center by playing the move d5, getting even more space. Now, black continues with knight a5, and now we see bishop d2. This knight captures on b3, and this queen captures on b3. And this is still definitely well-known territory. In fact, Vasif Durabaili has actually had a couple games in this line, but it seems to have scored pretty well for white historically. That being said, definitely black isn't doing too badly here. I think black's position is totally fine. There's a couple main moves that have been played. Castles is totally fine for black. d6 has also been played, keeping an eye on the e5 square. But in the game, Carissa Yip shows a third option, which is c5. This move, of course, taking queenside space as quickly as she can, not allowing white any time to try and prevent these moves. Immediately c5. The downside to this move is that after bishop c3, for one, your bishop's attacked, and for two, this e5 square is starting to look a little bit underdefended. If black isn't careful here, white might just try to roll over the center with this move e5, and then looking at moves like e6 or even d6 to really stifle the black pieces. Because of this, black actually plays a pretty unorthodox move here. Ben Feingold fans will go crazy. Black plays f6. It's actually kind of the only move for black here. The idea being, one, you keep your powerful bishop on the long open diagonal, and two, you're keeping an eye on this e5 square. You're not allowing white this very important pawn break. And with that in mind, white actually plays this move a3 here. The idea is to prevent this move b4 from kicking this bishop off of its natural square. But now, this gives black the time to play d6 and firmly clamp down on this e5 square, making sure white's not breaking through in the center just yet. Now white continues with this move h4, just trying to put some pressure on Carissa. Carissa doesn't flinch though, in fact castles into the king's side, despite this h-pawn coming down the board. White takes the time to finish her development. We now see a slightly strange move, queen e8, perhaps rerouting to this f7 square, perhaps just putting some more pressure on this weak e-pawn, perhaps preparing for moves such as f5 in the future. White castles. Black plays bishop d7, supporting this b-pawn further, preparing some queenside advances. White goes ahead with queen c2, and now is where Carissa starts to go just a little bit wrong. Really, black would love to be expanding on the queen side like this. And in order to do that, the A file quite often opens up. And because of that, black might want to be keeping this rook on A8, just so it can contest this file pretty naturally, pretty easily, without too much difficulty. Also, if you notice, there's really one main problem piece in Black's camp here, and it's this knight on e7. This knight is not helping any of Black's plans. In fact, it's really in Black's way, blocking this queen from eyeing this e-file. So perhaps the best move here is actually to play something like knight c8. Maybe White will play a move like b3, giving this bishop some space. You can play knight b6, and very naturally bring this knight to support the queen side. In addition, you're opening up this queen, as I said, and Black is doing just fine in this position. Instead, though, we see Carissa bring the rook to c8, and this move doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. This rook really belonged on a8, and this c8 square would have been much better served for this knight. White does continue with b3, and now Carissa goes for h6, keeping an eye on the g5 square, perhaps eyeing once again these f5 breaks. That is something this knight on e7 can do. But the problem is, these things are coming a little bit too slow, because now that Black has diverted her rook from the a-file, White takes the opportunity to actually challenge her on the queen side with the move a4, preparing to open things up. And now Carissa actually kind of admits her mistake and brings the rook back to the a-file. So pretty clearly, the move knight c8 might have been a bit better there. White does open the a-file with a takes b5. Carissa obliges with a takes b5. We see the trade of rooks, and now White brings her other rook over to the a-file, and we see queen b7 from Carissa, preparing to challenge this file. And here White played a very natural move, but it turns out to just be the wrong way to go in this case. The right way to play is also fairly natural, and it's a little bit more common in these types of structures where you see Black expanding on the queen side like this. So I'll let you at home try and find the best move to slow down Black's pawn rush on the queen side here. We'll call it a pawn rush or space-gaining adventure over here for Black. You want to slow it down, you want to claim some space for yourself. See how you can do it. All right, hopefully at home you guys found the move. It's just b4. b4 really challenges these Black pawns in an uncomfortable way. Probably you should be playing c4, but now these pawns are well blockaded. The one pawn and this white bishop do a nice job of stopping these pawns in their tracks, and perhaps b5 is going to prove to be a little bit of a weakness. You can imagine rook a5 coming on the board soon. And if Black does play a move like rook a8, now we can support this rook from behind with a move like queen a2, or even queen b2, putting pressure on the king side, but we'll stick with queen a2. And you can imagine now, even moves like b takes a5 coming on the board. And these pawns are actually under just a little bit of pressure. You can't really be pushing to b4 just yet, because I'll play a6, and eventually you're going to have to divert your queen and lose this pawn. And so this passed a pawn would give White some really nice chances here, thanks to the space she gains with b4. Instead, though, she plays the natural, but not so good, queen a2. And then, very naturally, the way to refute this is to play the move first b4, and after bishop b2, you can reroute your pieces in any number of ways towards this queen side. And Black would be doing fine once again. Carissa chose a different path, which is also okay for Black, just to play knight c8 immediately. And now, b4 actually hits with much less impact, because Black can actually ignore it and just play knight b6. And while this does look slightly scary, this is, in fact, totally fine for the Black player here. So instead of b4, we actually see knight e1 from Wenjun, bringing this knight to help in the queen side. But now, after b4, bishop b2, we see bishop b5, activating the bishop, knight c2, and now actually bishop d3. So we see because White didn't play b4, Black played b4 herself and used this to activate her bishop along these light squares. Now after knight e3, Carissa brings her queen over to e7, once again putting more pressure on this weak e-pawn. And we see that the white major pieces on the a-file really didn't manage to achieve anything, despite their total dominance over this file. In fact, this square is covered by this bishop, this square is covered by this knight, and the e8 square is more or less useless. As soon as your queen jumps there, this knight's able to jump elsewhere, perhaps, and attack the queen, and really this queen isn't making any threats from a8. So very instructive stuff from Carissa, allowing her opponent this a-file, but ensuring that it isn't useful, instead creating threats elsewhere. Wenjun was now forced to bring her rook back off of the a-file to help defend against some of these threats. Carissa brings her knight to a very natural b6 square, and now after queen a1 it is now actually Carissa who controls the A file. So very, instructive maneuvering there from Carissa, creating threats where the white major pieces kind of abandoned, and then using those threats to gain control of the A file for herself. This queen now steps to c1, and we see black play this move h5, just locking this pawn on this dark square, and perhaps, in fact, allowing this bishop an extra opportunity to get active. White now plays the move, knight e to c4. That is this one, I believe. Opening up this rook and making use of the c4 square. But actually, after knight takes and knight takes, now this rook does come into a useful square on a2. And white is in quite serious danger here due to just the sheer activity of the black pieces. White continues with g3, just trying to solidify things a little bit. We see king h7, kind of forcing through this bishop h6 idea. Knight d2 from white. We see bishop h6 from black, and this game is kind of over. White is totally lost here. Perhaps white missed the opportunity, though, to play the move rook e3. When after bishop h6, white will play f4. And while Carissa has a few opportunities here, you can kind of take an extra pawn if you like. But now, white also has some opportunities to get back into the game with moves like queen b1, taking advantage of some nasty tactics here. And so white might have been able to get just a little bit back into the game, using this knight on c4, putting more pressure here, and using these tactical ideas along the e file. But instead, we did see knight d2, when after bishop h6, f4. Now, the black queen, is not tied to this pawn, because this queen has moved, so we can see queen a7 come onto the board. White tries to bring her knight back to c4, but it's just a bit too late. Now we see queen d7, which is a better square for the queen, eyeing these squares on the king side. Rook e3 from white's, but now bishop takes c4, takes the knight off the board. Now that the knight is gone, the queen is free to move once again. We see queen g4, the king comes to h1, and now the sacrifice of the game, we see bishop takes f4, and after g takes f4, this queen is just wreaking havoc on the queen's side with all of these pawns falling in short order. In the game, the queen stepped to b1, and Carissa played the nice move, rook takes b2, with a clearly winning endgame here. Not much left to be done in this game besides win it, so that's exactly what Carissa did. Wenjun tried to pick up this pawn, but after queen takes e4 check, and b3, this pawn is running up the board. Wenjun gave a few checks with queen f8 check and queen d8 check. But now after king f5, queen d7, king e5, queen g7, king f4, queen f6, king g4, queen e6 check, queen f5, queen takes d6. We saw queen f2 check, king h1, queen f3, king h2, queen h3, king g1. And then, to round out the game, we see the nice move, queen g3, forking the king and queen, forcing a trade. And now, black will be promoting with checkmate. And this is where Wenjun actually threw in the towel, right after queen g3 check. And so, a very nice game by Carissa Yip, a game where she actually outmaneuvered the women's world champion. Not an easy task by the 16-year-old from America. And I forgot what I was going to say, Danny, so I'm just going to take a second here. Come up with a conclusion to this game. Let's see. Okay. And this game really shows the importance of keeping your opponent's pawn pushes at bay, not allowing them to take more space to activate their pieces. White missing this opportunity with b4, losing control of the game, and finding her pieces on the A file simply misplaced. Well done to Carissa Yip for taking out the Women's World Champion once again. Thank you for joining me. This has been Game Review, and I will see you in the next episode.